Hey everyone. Today I'm reacting to the article Shakespeare in the Bush by Laura Bohannan. This article is a fascinating example of how our worldviews shape the way we understand stories, traditions, and even other people. It really made me think about how easy it is to assume that our own way of seeing the world might not always be the correct way. To start with a brief summary, the article tells the story of anthropologist Laura Bohannan, who is living with the Tiv people in West Africa. She believes that Shakespeare's Hamlet is a universal story that people from any culture would understand in essentially the same way. When she tells the story to the Tiv elders, however, they constantly they constantly interrupt to explain why the characters' actions don't make sense according to their own cultural beliefs. They reinterpret almost every major event in the play based on their traditions, their values, and their expectations. By the end, Bohannon realizes that Hamlet is not interpreted universally. Instead, every culture understands stories through its own worldview. One of the biggest ideas uh, is the in the article is the impact of the worldview on interpreting cultural meanings. A worldview is a collection of beliefs, values, customs, and assumptions that influence how people understand information. The Tiv elders, they interpreted Hamlet according to their own cultural norms rather than Shakespeare's intended meaning. For example, they rejected the idea of Hamlet's father's ghost returning to speak to him because, in their worldview, ghosts do not wander the earth in that way. Instead, they believed that the spirit must have been a bad omen or another supernatural being. Likewise, they questioned Hamlet's hesitation to kill Claudius because, in their culture, family responsibilities and justice were understood differently. Their interpretations were completely logical within their own worldview, but even though they differ dramatically from the author's original intentions. The article also reveals an ethnocentric bias on the part of Bohannon. Ethnocentrism is the tendency to judge another culture using the standards of one's own culture. So at the beginning of the article, Bohan assumes that Hamlet contains universal truths that everyone would recognize. This assumption reflects a Western perspective that values Shakespeare as a timeless and universally understood source. She initially believes that if the Tiv interpret the story differently, that they are misunderstanding it. But the discussion continues. She realizes that the Tiv are not misunderstanding the story at all, but instead they are interpreting it through their own cultural lens. The story really changes or challenges the idea that our own cultural values are normal or best. It reminds us that what seems obvious or natural to us may seem unusual or even incorrect to someone from another culture. Every culture develops its own traditions and ways of making sense of the world. Instead of assuming that one perspective is superior, the article encourages us to recognize that different interpretations can all make sense within their own cultural context. A unique norm in like my culture is birthdays. You got a cake, you got candles, you blow out the candles, you make a wish. And then to me, this it feels normal because it happens every year. However, someone from another culture who doesn't celebrate that may find that strange and confusing, some sort of weird ritual. You know, they might wonder why people are gathering around a dessert to sing to one person and believe they silently make a wish is significant. Just like the Tiv interpreted Hamlet, though, or through their own customs, an outsider would likely interpret this birthday tradition through the beliefs and experiences from where they grew up. One of the best practices for communication across cultures is to approach conversations with curiosity and humility rather than assuming what you know and how you do things is correct. We should ask questions. We should actively listen and try to understand why another person seems or sees something differently. A great example from this article is how the Tivs, the elders, confidently explained what they believed the events in Hamlet actually meant, rather than simply dismissing the interpretation as wrong. Bohannan eventually recognized that their explanation reflected a completely different cultural framework. Effective intercultural communication requires recognizing that people may interpret the same event in very different ways because of their own world view. There's, I guess, a story and experience that I could tell you guys. I was 18 years old. I just completed boot camp for the United States Army, and it was 2009. And I got shipped over to my first duty station, and that was Camp Casey, South Korea. What a shocker that was. The example that I could give you is one day, some of the guys from my unit took me out to what we call the Ville. Now, I was in Camp Casey, which is in the Dongducheon province, about 9.5 miles south of the demarcation zone. And we went to a regular, traditional, normal Korean restaurant. And now I go in there and I made a couple mistakes. The first one is I walked in with my shoes on. I didn't know that when I walked into that building, the moment I stepped in through that door, I was supposed to stop. I was supposed to unlace my shoes, take them off, and put them right by the front entry door. I didn't do that. I got yelled at. So did that, and then I went around and then I asked the people where the tables were or where the chairs were, didn't knowing that you were supposed to walk in and sit on the floor without your shoes. And then they brought out some squid in a jar and they opened it up and they tossed it out. It was alive. That was a wild moment, but those were all these different things that were cultural norms to them in their traditions and their society, and how they ate, how they how they're supposed to be dressed within the facility or the restaurant. And yeah, it was eye opening. But overall, I guess the most important lesson I gained from the article uh, is that the perception is deeply influenced by culture. Um, but I thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed this, I guess you can leave a like because it's going to be on YouTube now. I'll see the rest of my class in future assignments. Good luck, guys.